A man dialed in a report about a teen whose demeanor struck him as odd, but when her mother appeared, the dialogue veered into territories he'd never imagined. Beneath a low-hanging sun that spilled elongated, golden rays over Holliston Park, a serene, meticulously maintained green oasis in Lexington, Kentucky, families meander, parents gently guiding strollers, retirees savoring languid twilight strolls, and joggers orbiting the winding paved trails. The soft breeze carries distant echoes of playground laughter while two children dash along a path beside a shimmering pond near a picnic table. At 16, Brielle Adams arranges her makeshift office. She withdraws her laptop from her backpack, angling it carefully to dodge the setting sun's glare. Her notebook lies open beside her, brimming with scrawled notes, highlighted passages, and quotations from historic civil rights battles that she is artfully weaving into her report. Her fingers dance over the keyboard, scarcely registering the world around her, a haven she's frequented ever since she earned the freedom to ride her bike unsupervised. It is peaceful and intimate, at least to her. Yet not everyone shares this bond with the park. Gerald Whitmore, a man in his mid-50s clad in a crisply pressed polo and sporting an expensive watch, sits rigidly on a bench. His daily ritual is unchanging, venturing to the park, checking his phone, and savoring a brief escape from his nearby home. However, today an unsettling ripple disrupts his routine. He spies Brielle alone, her laptop open as she delves into her work. His gaze lingers, a subtle alarm echoing within him. Not that she's misbehaving or causing trouble, but she simply does not seem to belong. He studies her for another minute, arms folded tightly as her nonchalant ease, almost as if she owns the park, deepens his misgivings. Scanning the surroundings, he half expects to see a guardian, coach, or a band of friends to account for her presence, yet she remains solitary, and in his mind, that solitude is enough to trigger suspicion. Unbeknownst to Brielle, every keystroke is shadowed by a watchful eye, and a fateful decision looms, one that will upend everything. Meanwhile, Gerald remains oblivious to the role he is about to play. Exhaling sharply, Gerald's grip on his phone tightens. Something about the girl at the picnic table feels profoundly off. He shifts uneasily on the bench, trying to banish the thought, but it persists. In his neighborhood, children rarely linger alone in parks. Perhaps she is waiting for someone, meeting a friend, or engaged in secretive plans. Each speculative notion builds upon the last, drawing him further into suspicion. What if she's surveying houses, or discreetly coordinating with a group over her phone? He watches as she casually retrieves a water bottle from her backpack, so relaxed, almost too at ease. Glancing at his watch, he notes it is nearly 6 o'clock. Although the park remains populated, the crowd is thinning. He searches for corroboration, a second pair of eyes, but no one else appears perturbed. He exhales again, convinced that just because others do not see the problem, it does not vanish. Casting his gaze back at Brielle, he sees her absorbed, her eyes flitting between screen and notes, her fingers dancing over keys. She appears harmless, yet he reminds himself that danger rarely announces itself at first glance, does it? Gerald unlocks his phone, his thumb hesitating before dialing the Lexington Police Department. "What's your emergency?" comes a measured reply. "Hi, I'd like to report something suspicious," he begins, careful not to sound paranoid. After a brief silence, a polite yet firm voice asks, "What's going on?" Lowering his tone as if confiding urgent news, he explains, "I'm at Holliston Park. There's a teenage girl sitting alone at a table with a laptop. I'm not sure what she's doing, but it doesn't seem right." The dispatcher inquires neutrally, "Is she causing any trouble?" Gerald pauses, "Not exactly." He glances back at her, as if seeking proof. "She's been here a while by herself. You might want to check it out." After another pause, the dispatcher concludes, "We'll send an officer to look into it." Exhaling deeply, Gerald feels his duty complete as he leans back on the bench, watching Brielle continue her work, unaware that she has just been marked by suspicion. Little does he know, his call will not unfold as he expects, and in a few minutes, he will rue the moment he picked up his phone. Brielle remains engrossed when the crunch of tires over gravel heralds the arrival of a police cruiser, a sound so familiar that it almost goes unnoticed. Yet, when a second cruiser approaches, she finally lifts her gaze. The first officer alights from his vehicle, adjusting his belt, tall, lean, and exuding routine authority. Nearby, a stockier second officer stands with rigid posture, his gaze methodically scanning the park before settling on her. The sensation of their eyes upon her quickens her heartbeat, and she discreetly removes an earbud as the taller officer advances. "Excuse me, miss," he intones, his tone casually yet firm. "May I ask what you're doing here?" Startled, Brielle blinks. Homework," she stammers, gesturing toward her open laptop and scattered notebook as confusion creeps into her voice. The second officer, stationed near the cruiser, silently observes with his hand resting a bit too near his holster. The taller officer nods without a change in expression. "We received a report about a suspicious person in the park. You've been here for a while," he states. Brielle's brow furrows. "Yeah, I'm working on an assignment," she replies. The label suspicious person tightens her stomach as she scans the park, wondering, who reported me? The stockier officer, still at a distance, exhales as if dismissing her as a nuisance. "Got some ID?" he demands. Brielle hesitates. "What for?" she asks, while the taller officer sizes her up, remarking that it's just a routine check. She knows too well that routine is not the same for everyone. She recalls schoolmates, kids who look like her, laughing and tossing chips at these very tables without ever being asked for identification. Her fingers tremble as she reaches for her bag. "It's in here," she murmurs. The stockier officer shifts slightly, his stance tightening as his hand grazes the edge of his holster. Brielle freezes, her breath catching. She is painfully aware that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. In a softer, measured tone, she says, "I'm just grabbing my wallet," deliberately exaggerating each motion to prove she poses no threat. She produces her wallet and hands over her ID. The taller officer, badge reading Reynolds, glances between the card and her face. "You live around here?" he inquires. "I live 5 blocks away," she replies with a measured exhale. Reynolds hesitates, a flicker of doubt and realization crossing his face, but before he can speak further, a loud honk shatters the moment. A sleek black sedan screeches to a halt, the tires barely pausing, as the driver's side door swings open. In that heartbeat, everything shifts. Unbeknownst to Gerald, still seated on his bench, a new figure steps into the fray. Olivia Barrett emerges from the car, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her navy blue blazer remains impeccably pressed and her tailored slacks unwrinkled despite a long day in court. She strides as though she owns every room she enters, and in this park, no exception exists. In mere seconds, her eyes sweep over the scene. Brielle stands stiff, expression unreadable yet shoulders tense, fingers curled into her palms, 2 officers nearby, one clutching her ID, the other hovering near his belt, clusters of bystanders, a mother whispering by the swings, and a jogger who has slowed just enough to watch. Then Olivia's gaze fixes on him, Gerald, the lone figure still seated, and without missing a beat, she strides toward the officers. "Officers," she declares in a voice both smooth and resolute, "is there a problem here?" Reynolds stiffens and turns to face her, clearing his throat. We were just," before he can continue, Martinez, the stockier officer who does not easily back down, interjects, "We received a report about a suspicious individual." Olivia's jaw tightens. In a charged silence, Brielle exhales, "Mom, they asked for my ID." Olivia's gaze remains fixed on the officers. "And what exactly made her suspicious?" she challenges. Reynolds hesitates. "Well, someone reported it, right?" Olivia nods sharply, her expression hardening. "Did that caller mention a crime, or is sitting in a park with a laptop now sufficient probable cause?" Martinez straightens his posture. "Ma'am, we were just following protocol. If there's no issue, we'll be on our way." Olivia steps closer. "Not yet," she insists. Martinez shifts ever so slightly, enough for her to notice, and adds, "I want to know who made the call." Reynolds clears his throat. "We can't disclose that." Olivia releases a slow, humorless sigh before stating crisply, "My name is Olivia Barrett. I'm a federal prosecutor, and if you think I'm unaware of my daughter's rights, you are gravely mistaken." Martinez remains still, yet a spark of realization flickers in his eyes. Olivia watches as the officers scramble to process the sudden reversal. Moments ago they held the reins, now chaos stirs. Across the park, Gerald Whitmore suddenly feels very small. Olivia Barrett is not merely a concerned mother, she is a force to be reckoned with. Martinez's posture becomes rigid the instant Olivia introduces herself as a federal prosecutor, appending the entire dynamic. Reynolds adjusts his belt, uneasy under her piercing gaze, his eyes dropping to Brielle's ID still clutched in his hand, an unmistakable sign of his burgeoning doubt. Without allowing them time to recover, Olivia folds her arms and states in a calm yet cutting tone, let me get this straight. A man calls in a report of a suspicious person, a 16-year-old girl doing homework in a public park, and instead of questioning the report's validity, you appear with your hands hovering near your holsters? Martinez squares his shoulders. Ma'am, we were just following protocol. Olivia tilts her head slightly. Oh, and what is the protocol for racial profiling? A heavy silence ensues. Brielle watches intently, her heart pounding. She has seen her mother cross-examine witnesses in courtrooms before, but witnessing her dismantle two officers in real time fills her with an overwhelming gratitude. Reynolds clears his throat, offering, "We didn't know she was your daughter." Olivia's brow arches in silent inquiry, would that have made a difference? He hesitates, the answer hanging palpably between them as Martinez shifts uncomfortably, exhaling sharply through his nose. Unflinching, Olivia steps forward. "Allow me to explain something to you, officers," she declares, each word measured like the closing argument in a high-stakes trial. "I have spent decades dismantling cases that begin exactly like this, where a single phone call spirals into harassment, which then escalates into actions that ruin lives." Reynolds swallows hard. "You saw a black teenager sitting alone, and instead of asking questions, you assumed." Olivia continues, her tone incisive, "Instead of thinking for yourselves, you allowed someone else's bias to dictate your response. You permitted a call from a stranger to label my daughter a threat. You permitted a call from a stranger to label my daughter a threat. You permitted a call from a stranger to label my daughter a threat. You permitted a call from a stranger to label my daughter a threat. You permitted a call from a stranger to label my daughter a threat. You permitted a call from a stranger to label my daughter a threat." As the weight of her words settles, Gerald's face pales with the grim realization that he has acted on his discomfort. A nearby jogger, who had feigned indifference, suddenly stops stretching and turns away, while a woman with a stroller quickens her pace. The officers shift uneasily as they await permission to depart. Olivia addresses them once more. "I hope you think twice next time, and ask yourselves why you didn't pause to question the report before charging in." Reynolds nods stiffly, Martinez mutters under his breath, and without another word, they turn back to their patrol cars. Gerald stands, swallowing hard, but as Olivia steps aside, allowing him to pass without another glance, he hurries off, head bowed and phone clutched tightly. As he disappears down the sidewalk, Brielle finally exhales. Her mother gently rests a hand on her back. "Are you okay?" Brielle nods, though her voice is tight. "You shouldn't have had to come here at all." Olivia sighs, "I know." They walk toward the car, leaving behind the officers, bystanders, and Gerald Whitmore, who will remember this moment far longer than he expected, for today he learned that assumptions have consequences. As Brielle and Olivia approach the car, the park seems transformed despite its familiar winding paths, clustered trees, and golden shafts of sunlight. An unseen charge fills the air. People watch. A woman near the swings pauses in her push, lips slightly parted. She did not stare, yet she saw everything. A man with a golden retriever, previously lost in his podcast, now casts tense, hesitant glances. A group of teenagers at the basketball court, who had been playfully shoving each other moments ago, falls silent. One, perhaps 15 or 16, meets Brielle's eyes briefly before looking away. The officers have departed, Gerald is gone, yet the moment lingers. Brielle exhales sharply as she nears the car. "Are you sure that's it?" she asks, her voice tight. Olivia unlocks the door. "For today, yes." Brielle bites the inside of her cheek, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "For today," she repeats softly. Olivia meets her gaze, understanding all too well. "I know that tone, it tells me tomorrow will be similar." "Tomorrow, then?" Brielle asks, quieter now. "Tomorrow, we keep going, as always," Olivia replies honestly. Brielle looks away with a nod, though her jaw remains set. Without further word, Olivia opens the driver's door and slides in. Brielle follows, fastening her seatbelt while staring straight ahead. As they pull away, Gerald Whitmore, still seated on a distant bench, watches the taillights fade. He remains motionless for a long while, his hand still wrapped around his phone, uncertain of what to do now. Today, he was not in control. For the first time, he must bear the consequences of his own fear. Such moments occur every day, perhaps not always in a park or with a federal prosecutor arriving in time, but the assumptions, the fears, and the choices that lead to these events are all too real. Brielle did nothing wrong. She simply sat at a table, opened her laptop, and typed her thoughts, yet another's perception turned her into a suspect. What if Olivia had not arrived? What if the officers had behaved differently? What if Brielle had reacted as any ordinary person, frustrated, confused, asking too many questions? Would they have let her go, or would the story have taken another turn? We know the answer, which is why conversations about bias and perception are not mere social issues, they are matters of life and death. So the next time you catch yourself making assumptions about someone, pause. Ask yourself, why do I see them this way? What story am I telling myself about them, and what might happen if I act on that story? For assumptions have consequences, and some mistakes are irrevocable. If this narrative stirred your thoughts, share it, leave a comment, and if you haven't yet subscribed, remember, there are more stories waiting to be told.